Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hanselminutes. Today I'm talking with Brandon Tory. He's a staff Google AI engineer, and on the side, he's put together a thing called Little Hackers that's going to be launching very soon on Kickstarter. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out. One of the things that's really interesting, if people start looking for you on the internet and start, low key Google stalking you and figuring out what you're all about, is you seem to have a heck of a lot of time on your hands because you're doing multiple things. And you've referred to it as multi-dream. I've
Yeah.
heard it as people referring to it as multi-hyphenate. What do you think about those titles? I mean, you didn't want to pick a lane. You just picked all the lanes and built your own freeway.
Yeah, that's a really great analogy. I think for me it stems back to the beginning. When I was a kid, I was really into hacking, and I saw a couple movies that really inspired me to get into that world. And I ended up spending a lot of time in, like, IRC. So that was my beginning with coding. And at the same time, like, I lived in a neighborhood where, like, hip hop was prevalent, and I had been through a lot of things with my family. So in my adult life, I needed to find a way to kind of converge these identities. It was really hard. And I remembered back to, like, the Intel manual, thinking about, like, multi-threading and, like, the context switching between the task segment. And I thought, what if I could use that analogy with life? What if we could just context switch and multi-thread? And so yeah, that's what I've been using.
Interesting. I've done talks on personal productivity and how I get around and do get a lot done, or at least what I perceive to be a lot done. While I'm not particularly a purveyor of like hustle culture in the sense of the reason you're not succeeding is you need to work hard and not sleep.
Right.
There's got to be balance, and I've found that's the context switch that costs us. Right?
It is. It absolutely is.
Multitasking is a lie. You can't
Hmm.
really do multiple things. You have to switch contexts.
Well,
How do
it's the
you do
same
that?
thing with concurrency and hardware, right? It's the same thing. The context switch is actually where the cost is. And
Hmm.
so what you really want is multiple machines. You don't want multi-threading, you want multiple machines. That's how you do distributed computing.
Hmm.
So what you realize in life is that you have to start to trust other people. That's the equivalent of having multiple machines. So you can multi-thread for a little while, but at a certain juncture, you have to decide, how do I bring other people into this, convince them about a vision, and then make it a distributed network, which is when you get into things like organizations.
Interesting, and that's why the fallacy that Beyonce has the same number of hours in a day as that we do, being used against us, forgets that Beyonce has a team.
As a team, exactly. But that's hard as well, because building trust takes time. So if you are trying to be, maximally productive, I talked about this in kind of my theory of multi-dream. You have to allocate time to build relationships and build trust with people. Otherwise, you'll never actually be able to get to the point where you feel comfortable handing off your precious thing that you're trying to develop and saying, you take this portion of the work. I trust you to do that.
How do we get the next generation? How do we send the ladder back down when a lot of people are feeling like even one dream is too much to wish for? Has the time passed? The IRC is gone. The
Yeah.
Intel manuals are online. Is it still possible?
I get sad about that sometimes, right? I used to read RFCs in text format, and I would go on IRC and just idle and try to, like, build credibility within the different networks and try to make friends. And, I remember there was this big era in IRC when they just started denial of service and the whole thing, and everybody disappeared. And it was like the end of an era. I reminisce about that, but, like, new things pop up. Everybody's on Discord now, so you can still find sentiments of the old world. I do get nervous with all these closed systems. Like, my son has an iPad or, like, an Apple computer. Like, you can't take it apart the way you used to. So it's tough to, like, bring it back to that world that I think some of us came up in the engineering world. So I don't know. It's a great question.
Yeah, for me, when I started in the 80s, building your own stuff was the thing. Like even an Apple II, you could pop the top right off. Like they wanted
Exactly.
you to move the monitor aside and pop the top. And look at that, it's inside of a computer.
Yeah.
And an iPad seemed to be just a black box. And I feel like it's turned my kids into consumers rather than producers.
I had a controversial debate with a friend of mine the other night. He was talking about how Steve Jobs has had such a positive impact on the world, and I think he has. Right, undeniably, our ability to communicate is fantastic. I'm on an Apple computer right now as we talk. But at the same time, in terms of, like, impact for the next generation, I'm not a fan of the closed system mentality, of the idea of, let's make something that is so um, pro user that there's no space to, like, take it apart and understand how it really works.
Yeah, the right to fix is a really
The
interesting.
right to fix, I should be able to enhance my RAM. on my
Yeah.
own, right?
I'm going tomorrow to the Apple store because the battery on my iPad spontaneously decides to be one of those things where it's like 30%, nah, 0. And they're going to go in the back room and it's going to come back magically fixed. I don't even know how they cracked it open. And that makes me sad because what do I do? Well, now I have to turn to Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and the up and coming, kind of IoT revolution with people
Mhm.
like Adafruit to get the kids to think about these things.
Where's the thing? There's always a choice, right? We could always develop our own operating system or build a custom Linux kernel and like, you know, go and crowdfund and try to build a new hardware stack. The issue is that these companies have built up so much capital um, with like the device drivers and everything else. It's just so unrealistic to start over.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a choice. Like we could go off and like say, okay, we're just going to do open technology, but how do you compete and make something that's interoperable with the things that people need, nowadays?
Yeah. Well, and how do you compete is actually a theme that I think is going to run through this entire conversation because with little hackers, you've got a workbook
Hmm.
and you're sneaking information into their brains by sprinkling augmented reality in there. But if you scroll down and you're actually a parent and you read, you actually call out for every n number of pages you have, X number of minutes on the computer. You actually let me know as a parent that this is not a book that's meant to get into an app that's meant to sell you something.
Correct.
You have a balance. It reminds me in the 80s when my mom would say 1 hour on the computer, 2 hours outside. And I would sit on
Correct.
the stoop to ratio
Correct.
that, and you're doing that with little hackers. You didn't build an app, you built a book with a supporting app.
Absolutely. I have a history of building apps. I used to be an engineer at Apple. I was on the first party apps team, and
Mm-hmm.
before that, I did some startup work where I developed an app. So I'm familiar with building apps and deploying apps, and I love apps, but I tend to favor when people think of ideas that can be powered by an app, but there's a bigger theme, and an app is just one of the touch points.
Mm-hmm.
And with little hackers, with the age group that I really wanted to speak to, which is like the 6 to 8 age range, a light bulb just went off. That like, well, maybe we don't need a computer at all. I actually was at my son's basketball practice and I was talking to other parents.
Hmm.
I was saying, hey, are your kids familiar with code? First thing the kid said to me is, I don't have a computer. And I thought, oh my God, you're 6. Of course, not every 6 year old has. I'm sure some do, but not every 6 year old has a computer, right? So, what if we could start teaching this through readability and just skip the whole computer step altogether? I mean, we teach math without computers, and so that was the inception of Little Hackers.
Yeah, and the workbooks look like the workbooks where my children use, learn their handwriting. So
Yes, that's what it's supposed to feel like.
why shouldn't it feel the same way? It's like, oh, I'm writing J. I wrote J earlier in class. Now I'm doing it to make a computer jump.
Exactly, exactly. When I was a kid, my grandfather used to bring me to Radio Shack, and I was a huge fan of the Forrest MIMS circuitry books.
Mm.
And those things were amazing. I mean, you could just have this 10-page little book. It was easy enough to read. And I would say, hey, can I get an LED? Can I get a resistor? And I'd put together those things. I learned so much through just reading and working through those very short books.
That's worth actually kind of like going a little deeper on just for those of us who may be hearing that word and not knowing. Forrest Mims with an author who wrote a whole series of workbooks, and they look like he just sat down with a clean piece of paper and beautiful handwriting and apparently a very large amount of patience and wrote his notebooks. And you just happen to be sitting over his shoulder looking at these notebooks. And I suppose that the font in Little Hackers is evocative of Forrest Mims' wonderful handwriting.
Exactly. Very inviting, very like accessible.
Mm-hmm. And you use QR codes in a very creative way because in the last maybe 4 or 5 years, I would say 5 years ago, I would even go so far as to say that I have said publicly QR codes are a joke. And the reason was you needed a special app to do stuff with them. But now
Yes.
basically every phone made in the last 5 years launches a web browser and then you can start doing cool stuff. How do you use QR codes in a way to bridge the physical and the virtual?
Yeah. Yeah, I think as you said, like if the hardware is not ready, then the software often falls flat, right? If you look at Instagram, I think the major innovation there was the timing, right? Camera phones became ubiquitous, and so the first app that was really good at creating an experience around that became, a unicorn. And I look at it similarly with AR and QR codes. Like when I got into the AR space for little hackers, the first thing I said was, we do not want people to have to download an app.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have to download any software to actually invoke the QR code or to experience the AR, that's a loss because the barrier to entry there, you've lost most of the users. And when I did the research and I realized, okay, AR can be completely implemented in JavaScript now. That's win number one. And QR codes are now ubiquitous on almost all phones. that's when I feel like, okay, the timing is perfect. Let's just use QR codes and do an AR experience in the web browser.
Yeah. And the characters, the two-dimensional characters come out of the page. You use the border. It's very clever. I have to give you credit for this.
Thank
It's
you.
quite clever. You know, it's just a gorgeous book, and then you have this green border around the outside, which you're obviously using to figure out the orientation of the page. You get the QR code that gives you that, and then the characters jump out and they walk around on the page.
Yeah, I grew my beard out for like 2 months trying to figure out this AR stuff. I got to give a big shout out to like the ARJS, just community in general.
Mm-hmm.
They've done a great job building an open source stack for developing AR as well as A-Frame. And yeah, just like diving in and understanding the documentation and trying to pull something together that I thought could be fun for kids. And then my wife actually did the 3D modeling that we used to render those dance moves of the characters in the book.
That's cool. One of the things you also seem to do is you're not trying to hide anything from the kids. I feel like iPads don't talk about CPUs and memory, and you're
Yeah,
like, "Hey, there's a CPU. Let's talk about it." This is the base of the pyramid that is starting, in my opinion, in education to be abstracted away.
it is.
And let's just put it this way: kids don't know how to drive a stick shift anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of it is about. I have friends that are like in education. They're studying at UCLA, and this is what they do. So a lot of times I have philosophical conversations like, "Hey, how do you approach education, and how can I bring that into Little Hackers?" I think the number one thing is building a language.
Hmm.
So as much as I want them to like walk away understanding, you know, Python pseudocode, what's more important is just understanding the terminology so they're not scared when they hear words like CPU or RAM,
Mhm.
and having that as a foundation to feel, oh, I'm comfortable in this space. So when I get to the next thing, which is maybe a variable, it's not this completely foreign world.
Why have we, the community that you and I have been members of for, since our formative years,
Yep.
made it so that people feel like, oh, I'm not a computer person, and they apologize at parties, like, oh, you work for Google, I'm just a cardiothoracic surgeon, I don't know these things. When did we become so fancy that we aren't an inclusive community for everybody?
You know what? I think that's a fantastic question. I think the tech community is relatively inclusive, but you have to do your homework, right? If you
Mm,
join IRC or Discord and you give off the impression that you're not willing to do your homework, people don't have the time. I think that's really the key is that for anyone that's chosen a professional career in technology, we all know that there are some nights where you just did not give up for the entire night. And it was not because somebody gave you the answer, it was because you put in 32 straight hours and you figured the thing out and you built up some type of memory or muscle memory, whatever you want to call it, that prepared you for the next episode of that when it came,
mhm.
right? And if you do that enough, when someone comes in and says, "Hey, I can't figure out how to print hello world," right? You start to build up a little bit of a guard where it's like,
Mhm.
okay, at least do your due diligence.
I feel like I've now that I'm 30 years into my technology career, so like working for money, been doing this 30 years.
Yep.
And if you go back to when I was 10, 40 years, right? But I don't count those. You count our 64 years, don't count. I worry sometimes that I'm losing my perspective on what someone should be able to do at 12, at 10,
Uh,
at 15. And I might have either too low or too high of expectations of a coming intern. How can I be as inclusive as possible and really help kids meet their potential, whether those kids are 25 or they're 40-year-old
yeah.
career switchers?
I think it's about abstraction. I think it's about, remembering that programming languages are really just a representation of meaning. And so I've seen engineers join Google with no programming experience at all, but they're mathematicians and they learn C++ in a couple months and they're effective engineers. So just remembering that if you're passionate and you're excited to solve problems, understanding the language layer is something that we all constantly do, right? Like I don't know how many times I've had to relearn JavaScript because things keep changing, and I'm not excited about it, but like it's just something I have to accept. Okay, this is part of the life, and if someone else is coming into technology and they don't know C++, it's similar to me saying, "Oh, I want to learn Solidity this week because I'm excited about blockchain."
Mm-hmm. That it seems to me then I'm going to guess that you are an advocate of systems thinking, that it's more important to understand the systems and their relationships and their layers of abstraction
Mhm.
than and syntax comes secondary.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I think that's one of my big things, even in my artist career, is this idea of don't design the flower, design the root. And if you focus on the root, if you focus on the system, then naturally there are some outcomes that will emerge. Now there are times when I do think it's important to focus on the details and the syntax, and that is important. But I tend to think system first.
Yeah. It seems like the system is complicated, though. The system was simpler when we were growing up, because now we're we. So I'm putting
Hmm.
you in the same bucket. 4 megs, 8 megs of memory, 16 megs of memory may have been a good amount of memory, and now it's 64 gigs or get out.
Yeah.
The stack is deeper. I used to teach from the assembly language from the Silicon up, and I'm
Hmm.
told by my early in career compatriots that I should be teaching from F12 tools, and that JavaScript is the new metal, and I don't need to worry about the little details. You know?
JavaScript is the new metal. Man, I don't know. Let me think about that. So I kind of think of it the same way. Like I think that from learning it from like I started with a hex editor, right? So I wanted to learn how to like read the binary so I could change the jump opcode and like
Yeah,
subvert something in a
I
game
was
when I
like in
was a
the
kid.
C64 demo scene.
Yeah, like that was my beginning, and then like learning assembly from there was super important. Then building on C and C++.
Right?
I don't think that's ever going to change. It may depend on what your goal is, right? Like if your goal is embedded systems, then that's still pretty important.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
your
it
goal
is.
is AI, then I may not start with assembly, right?
Right. So that's an acknowledgement that there's a lot more different kinds of jobs, and computer person isn't a job. Right?
Correct.
Like back in the
Correct.
day, it was like, oh, C. Okay, learn this, learn that, C, great job. But now there's so many languages and so many stacks and so many layers that somebody who's moving buttons around is different than an AI engineer, is different from a embedded systems engineer. And we just have to acknowledge that they have different skills.
Yeah, but I still think there's tremendous value in beginning at the root, as you said, like with
Mm,
assembly and going from the step from that up, because as new technologies emerge, like for example with the Ethereum virtual machine, when you look at the manual for that thing, it's very similar to the Intel x86 assembly manual, right? So it's like things tend to stem from the root. And the better your knowledge is of the foundation, when you go in and say, okay, maybe I'm doing JavaScript, but I need to do inline WebAssembly. Well, this isn't completely foreign to me. I know assembly. Or maybe I'm doing JavaScript, but now I want to write a Solidity contract. Well, the EVM seems a lot like, just a state machine in one of our processors. So I still think that there's a lot of value in starting lower in the stack.
yeah, that's good. That lines up a lot. That makes me comfortable because it makes me feel like I haven't been giving people bum dope,
Yeah.
because someone's like, well, should I learn AWS? Should I learn Azure? Should I learn Google Cloud? And it's like, well, listen, computers so far are always going to have memory and
Hmm.
IO, and the network will always add latency.
Yep.
So I tried to prove this by going on LinkedIn. You know how they have like the do you want to be certified things? Now
Hmm.
I'm an Azure person, so I just decided to take the AWS certification test cold, and I
Got it.
recorded it. Yeah, of course I got it. I don't
Nice.
know anything about AWS, right? But
There's no way I could pass that thing. That's
you could
just
totally, because computers are computers, right? I mean, that's the thing, right? It's you got If you think about the system, right? Like you put me in a car, if it's got a steering wheel and 4 wheels or even 3 wheels and a stick shift, I will bump around for a while and I will eventually be able to drive to the store.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. I agree. I agree with that. Computers are computers, but humans are also humans, and a lot of times humans design the interfaces, and that's where you get into
That's a great point.
that's where the trouble comes in.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So back to this concept of multi-hyphenate, multi-dream. I love that term, multi-dream. Um, it made me think, though, about the idea of not just context switching, but shit. Edit point, Mandy. I'm absolutely brain farting here. I'm diabetic and I had a little bit of a low blood sugar earlier.
No worries.
Um, what is it called when you are code switching?
Mm.
Okay, let me try
Hmm.
again. And Mandy, I'm going to try to ask this question again. When I heard the concept of a multi-dream, a multi-hyphenate, and given that you are a black man in tech and also had a time when you were coming up where you were homeless and your family was moving around, it made me think about the kind of code switching
Yeah.
that happens amongst people of color, and the difficulty and the emotional weight. It's one more context switch, and you're already context switching. So now I'm thinking about the combinatorics of context switching, and you're talking to Timberland and you're doing something, and then you got to go home and write some code, and then you got to get on a Zoom call. Don't you have a lot of overhead?
that was that was the whole thing. Yeah, that was where Multidream came from. I needed a way to label that and to understand what I was in. Um, I didn't understand like what code switching was until later in life, and then I read about it and realized like, oh, I do that, right? And I do have to kind of pay that tax of switching, um, kind of who I am depending on the space. And with Multidream, the idea was okay. I'll be like a processor, and I'll try to like context switch very quickly, and I can appear to be doing things concurrently. But as you said, there's really no concurrency. It's just a serialized set of operations that are slowed down. Um, and then I had this epiphany. It was like when I talked to my sister, and she was like, "You should just be honest." I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Just be honest. Just tell everybody who you are. Tell stop telling the people on the music side that you're just a rapper, and stop telling people on the tech side that you're just an engineer, and just come out and be forthright and just tell everybody who you are." And I was like, "That's crazy. I'd never, that's not going to make any sense. Like engineers won't get it. My music friends won't get it." And I ended up taking her advice, and that's where I started to actually have some success. That's where I got most of my press, and people started to get interested in my story because of the honesty, right? Just like, hey, I'm both. This is what I want to do. This is the emotion that I feel. I feel like I want to be accepted by my community and by my friends and by people that don't understand technology. And at the same time, I want to be successful in tech. I want to invent things. I want to innovate. And I don't always feel that these are compatible. I don't always feel that my identities are compatible. I don't feel like the way that I dress matches some of the goals that I have. And it turned out a lot of people resonated with that. A lot of people felt the same way. And that's kind of what kicked off the idea of Multidream, and even like the way that I operate now, like conversations like this.
So at the beginning, I made the postulate that maybe tech wasn't very inclusive, or at least it wasn't when I was coming up. And I think you said that it was pretty darn inclusive right now and getting better. It's definitely moving in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
When do you think things started to be like, listen, just be yourself? I
Mm-hmm.
feel like the last 5 to 10 years, particularly the last five, everybody found their niche. Everybody can say, hey, I'm a weeb and I do this and I like anime and I like rap and I do C++ and I work at Google and that's who I am. And suddenly people are unapologetically themselves. Inclusion is the new black.
Yeah, it's a good it's a good idea. I think in practice, like statistically, there still are some
Mm-hmm.
deficiencies in tech, right? And so you have people like me that and other people that are doing like multiple things or being their complete authentic self,
Mm-hmm.
and it may appear to be a representation of this kind of like equity across the board. I don't think that that's there under the hood,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think that it's gradually improving. I will say for me, the key was really anonymity, right? Like on IRC, nobody knew who I was, and so I never thought anything about inclusivity. I just thought like my name is Shadrach, and I'm on Dalnet and EFNet, and like I like C++. And so that was what was so exciting about the hacker world or the coding world, was this anonymity and this idea that like if I know how to dereference a double pointer and like do inline assembly to get something done, people will respect me in this room. They don't care what I look like, right? It wasn't until later in life that I started realizing like, hey, I'm the only black guy here. Like I didn't, that wasn't something that I thought of when I first entered the space.
Mm-hmm. How do we set things up such that are able to do that? Like you're basically sending the ladder back down with your projects, with your presence, and we want to make so that people can bring their full selves to a situation like this. I noticed that, of course, in Little Hackers, I assume are they based on your kids, the little avatars?
They're based on. I co-wrote the initial draft with my son.
Hmm.
My daughter wasn't born at the time. My daughter's born now, so loosely based on my kids, but just based on you know kids that I've seen or worked with or mentored, and just the idea of featuring them prominently. We did a focus group, and this was something I didn't even think of, but a kid pulled up the AR book, and he's like, "Is that me?" And we're like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Is this character supposed to be me?" And it's like, "Oh my god, no, it's not." But but like, it's great that you thought that, because now you're actually seeing yourself in one of these products.
That's really cool. That could be a version too, where they like get to have themselves in the book
Yeah,
and they jump out of the book.
it would drastically complicate the tech stack, but I think that that's that would be awesome.
Well, after it's dramatically successful, that would be a thing that you would want to go and blow up.
Absolutely.
So, are you able to find the time to balance all of these things? It's not very often I get to talk to somebody who has got all these different things that they're working on at the same time and managing family and kids, which is what
Yeah.
I'm doing as well.
I mean, it's becoming increasingly challenging. I think the key to this really is my wife. She's fantastic, and she enables me to do a lot of this stuff, both by like partnering with me and by just being an amazing mom. So without that, there's no way I could operate in this way. But yeah, in terms of finding time, it is tough. I've gone through different periods. Like I've gone through periods where it was like, how do I convert the concept of a day from 24 hours to 48 if
Mm.
I just structure what I do differently? Like if I work from 8 a.m. to 6 and then immediately go to sleep, then I can sleep until 12 and then I can work from 12 to 8 again, right? So like I've had those periods of insanity on my journey. And then I reached a point where it's like, all right, that's not going to work. How do I just build trust? How do I include more people in what I'm trying to do? How do I use honesty? I'm constantly growing and trying to learn better ways to like uh, have better time management.
I'm hearing in your stories though an intentionality. You're not letting any defaults get accepted. If there's a default that you don't like, you're like, I'm gonna analyze that default. I'm gonna change that default. Like people got to sleep from here. Nah, maybe I'll sleep different.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a big part of who I am. Is like the world as we see it now isn't how it has to be, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of that's at the root of anybody that wants to innovate.
There's been interviews in the past that I've read in Forbes and CNBC and different things that you've done where you have directly or indirectly had a little bit of sense of a self doubt.
Mm,
Maybe I use the term imposter syndrome when I refer to
mhm,
myself because I am somewhat visible, high performing person who also has crippling, uh, kind of like I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just making it up as I'm going along.
mhm.
Is that are those days over and you're pretty confident in your abilities right now?
It's interesting. I've always been a really confident person, but the self doubt was really from the music industry. The music
Mm,
industry is really challenging, and it's not objective in the same way that engineering is. There's really no right
mm,
answer. So you're creating this art, you're putting it out there, and you're hoping people love it or like it, right? And you have no control over that. So a lot of my vulnerability and my kind of self doubt came from this idea of being myself and putting that on display, and like, how are people going to receive that, right? I've never felt the imposter syndrome feeling um, within the context of technology. Now, that doesn't mean that I know everything, because I don't, but I've always felt that I could educate myself. I've always felt like, okay, maybe this topic is something that's not my expertise. I need to go and read more, and I'll come up to speed. But I've been doing it since I was a kid, and I feel very comfortable in those like highly ambiguous technical spaces. Where I feel less comfortable is like, when I get on stage and I'm going to say something that's really deeply important to me, and like I don't know if people care, or like how people receive that.
yeah. Yeah. I think that I want my kids and I want myself to always have the confidence in my ability to learn.
Exactly,
So, like,
that's the
yeah,
thing.
I can pick that up, no problem. I can learn that. It's going to be hard. There'll be awful moments. It's going to suck,
Exactly.
but tomorrow I'll feel better.
Yeah, I'm willing to fight to build the muscle I need to learn this thing.
Yeah, but
Exactly.
success in the music industry doesn't compile cleanly,
It doesn't
and
compile
it
cleanly.
like this song is a banger and no one is listening and I don't know why and they're wrong and I'm just going to keep going.
Yep. And you have to be able to oscillate, right? You have to be able to foresee that you may feel down on yourself and know that that will go away in order to play the long game in the art
Hmm.
world.
You've said before that you want kids to feel that it's cool to be a genius and you want them kind of stand in their own intelligence. How quickly do you think when kids are growing up, do they get the sense that like, I'm smart or I'm not? When do those tapes start
Yeah.
running in their brains and how do we keep them running as long as possible?
I think that could actually vary state to state, city to city, school to school. In the school that
Mm,
I attended, there were different groupings that they did, and I don't always agree with the way that they do this, but they would call certain kids out and say, "You're talented. We're going to put you in this group, and you're not. So we're going to put you in that group." And I think right in that moment, that's when kids start to think, "Okay, yeah, I'm going to be great," and other kids think like, "Oh, maybe this isn't for me." And I think we have to do a better job, or at an early age, of giving kids the self confidence, independent of where they are at the time.
hmm. Yeah, my son is 13, and a couple of months ago he said, "I'm not good at math," and I'm like, "Who told you that?" And he said he figured it out. Like one test went bad, and it's like if you start saying, and I said, if you say it out loud,
It's the
it comes
affirmation,
out of your mouth and it goes right out into the world and then back into your ears and into your brain, and you just heard it from the outside,
and you believe it.
and then you believed it, and that's where the vicious cycle starts. So you got
I
to start
told
saying positive stuff.
Yeah, my best friend is actually helping to train his wife's younger brother in basketball, and great kid, great skill. but doesn't have that killer instinct, doesn't have that self confidence. He keeps asking me, what should I do? I'm making him do push-ups every time he misses. It's not working. I'm doing this. I'm like, just tell him he's great. He's like, what? Like, just tell him he's great every day. I'm telling you, like the kids that I know that became great was because they just had people around them that just told them that they were great, and they started to believe it. And that's my philosophy.
I love that. So Little Hackers is going to have a Kickstarter soon. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. We're probably going to launch September.
All right. So somewhere around the time that this launches, there'll be a link. Right now, you can go to launch.little-hackers.com. That will probably be updated, and little-hackers.com will point to that Kickstarter around the same time as this podcast. So you should just stop listening right now and go check out Little Hackers. It lets kids as young as 6 start coding with 7 times less screen time, more paper, less computers, and the experiences that they have. You can use the phone, the tablet that you have lying around, get an AR experience, and the characters literally jump off the page, which is really, really cool. It's a great idea, and I wish you all the success with your launch.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And this was a really fantastic conversation.
Fantastic. I appreciate talking to you. We've been chatting with Brandon Tory. He's creating Little Hackers, and you can check out the links in the show notes. This has been another episode of Hanselminutes, and we'll see you again next week.